Mainly because you're from the coast region. Tobias Chanji, thank you. My side is not that good. But then let me cross over to my colleague Brenda Kerubo, who's in Parliament, senior business reporter. Brenda Kerubo, so the CS is expected to balance, between the post-COVID economy recovery and driving the president's agenda of the Big Four, whose implementation has equally been slowed down by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Good morning, Brenna. Of course, you're coming to you live from Parliament, where we expect the CS for National Treasury, Ukur Yatani, to give his budget reading at 3 p.m. I mean, it's quite an interesting time, considering that we are smack in the middle of the pandemic. It will be his second budget reading that is actually happening in the middle of the pandemic. So it is a tough balance. It's been touted as a pandemic budget. But at the same time, remember, he is looking at boosting an economy that has been affected by this pandemic, and at the same time, rein in on the deficit. So it is quite a tough balancing act. But for more details in relation to this, we are joined by the National Assembly Minority Leader, John Buddy, and also he is a member of the Budget Committee. Thank you so much for making time for us, and we really appreciate. I mean, the budget process in Kenya begins as early as September, and we are smack in the middle of the pandemic. How different has this year, as this current financial year that is coming to an end, been?
Let me put it, as you put it rightly, that budget process starts from September, when we prepare what we call the budget review outlook paper. But again, I want to just point out that this budget, the environment under which we are operating, has only been witnessed, I think, 3 times. One was in 1992, after the election of 1992, when the economy was at its all-time low. Then we again witnessed it around 2002, and then again in 2008, after the post-election violence. This is the first time in a very long period of time that the economy has grown with at 0.6%, something that has not happened over the years. We have not grown at below 4% in a long period of time. And this is because of the one, COVID-19, two, has been also the issues of flooding, and finally also the issue of locusts invasion. So these have caused or depressed our economy. But it's not just the Kenyan economy. The world economy shrunk at 3.3%, but is projected to grow at 6%. Now, our economy is now projected to grow at 6.3%. So what is this budget must be prepared at the background, and the objective that is put is in preparing this budget is a post-COVID economic strategy, recovery strategy. So it is a budget that is prepared at the backdrop of an economic strategy, objective, and agenda. So we expect that when the budget speech is read, what I call budget highlights and revenue-raising measures, there will be deliberate efforts that are put towards again, jump-starting the economy, or stimulating the economy, if you like. But that should be done in conjunction, or there should be nexus between the national government and the county governments, and I'll come to that probably.
All right,
Yes.
and just like you're saying, I mean, this budget is being prepared on the backdrop of, the pandemic, and at the same time, we have been slowing business activity, smack because of the restrictions that have been put in place to try and contain the disease. But if you look at the projections, 6.3%, don't you think that's a little bit too ambitious, considering that we still don't have coverage in terms of vaccines, and at the same time, we still having restrictions in place because of curbing the spread of the disease?
No, it may not be overly ambitious. In fact, I would dare say that this is the first time that I think we are preparing a budget that is not too ambitious. For a long period of time, Treasury has been very, very ambitious. I want to say that 6.3% may look a higher percentage, but looking at where we are coming from 0.6. So if we grow at 6.3%, it's reasonable and modest. And I will tell you that economy has shown signs of recovery. One, you will see that our exports is not doing so badly. We also recovered a bit in terms of agriculture. But again, I want to also just point out that the danger I see is we are facing uncertainty in terms of one, health pandemic. We are not sure whether there is going to be another wave, or what they call another variant may attack the country and then again lead to more closure of businesses. At least now the economy, the restrictions have been eased. But again, the other thing is the weather. unpredictable weather that we are seeing may again impact negatively on agriculture. But in a nutshell, the focus or the projections are not overly ambitious. I also want to point out that the vaccines, there's some action being taken. If you look at the supplementary budget too, it's largely because of addressing COVID issues, and there is a provision of about 6 billion shillings for procurement of vaccines. And also in this budget, we have about 3 billion shillings, or slightly above 3 billion shillings for procurement of the same. Remember, we have also development partners giving us 19 billion shillings. We were just needed to put in 14 billion shillings to make it 33 billion shillings to procure enough or at least reasonable number of vaccines to help cushion Kenyans and help Kenyans build herd immunity. If those resources are utilized efficiently and effectively, and I'm emphasizing that because in this country the problem has never been allocation of resources but the usage of the same and utilization of the same. The moment you put resources, some public officers and state officers see opportunity to make a kill out of it. If that is going to be stopped and we put all these resources into procuring vaccines, then I think we are going to make a positive step forward. I want to just mention one thing as I wind up on that question, that the projection on ordinary revenue is at 1,776 billion. That is not too ambitious because in the last financial year, which was more difficult than the one we are entering into, the figures were 1,594 billion. So that is an additional about 176 or 180 billion. That is not too ambitious in my view, because in 2018-2019, we managed to collect 1,704 billion. 2019-2020, before the pandemic, or partly with pandemic, we managed to collect 1,734 billion. So from 1,734 to 1,776, the increase is just about, say, 43 billion, not so ambitious as it has been previously.
But now we are having slowing business activity.
Yes.
We are having pay cuts, and most people have lost their income.
Yes.
And if you see the projections, especially for KRA, now they have 2.039 trillion shillings. Yeah. I mean, if you look at that, it means watching as Wanjiko, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, are they going to come for my bread? Mm-hmm. What are they going to come for next? Is it fuel prices?
Actually, they're proposing to come for your bread. But I want to point it out that the 2.39 billion is the total revenue projection. But ordinary revenue is at 1,776. The others are A in A and others. Yeah? So 1,776 is not overly ambitious, as I've mentioned. But then there is a proposed taxation, some of which would hurt the poor, which Parliament is considering. That can't we, like the one on the bread, on VAT, etc., and also the one on motorbikes and such like things. So these are things that the Finance Committee should look at, and when the proposals come to Parliament, we'll deal with. I still believe that even with the current tax rates, this revenue projection of 1,776 can be collected with the current tax regime if we put more pressure in terms of tax management and we ensure that taxes are collected and that people don't evade paying taxes. We will still raise this because we raised 1,734 billion just the other year. Why can't we raise it now when we are just recovering from COVID or COVID-19? The only problem would only arise if we are challenged with another pandemic or another wave. And again, also, we are going to uncertain political period. That again can affect revenue collection. And if there's adverse weather condition. But if factors remain constant as they are today, I would assure you, collecting in ordinary revenue 1,776 billion is not at all order. And it can be done within the current tax regime without increment or decrease of any taxation. Remember, in the last financial year we had challenged because we had the intervention for pandemic interventions resulted in certain exemption of certain taxes. Remember, you and I paid low taxes up to January this year. Right now that has been removed, and so it is possible to get this without going for your bread, as you put it.
And, speaking about the reliefs, yesterday I had a discussion with the CS Yatani just before, of course, he reads his budget today.
Yeah.
And one of his prime concerns was the fact that everybody who's supposed to pay for the taxes, whether they're doing business or individuals, some of them are just evading, like you're saying. And they're saying for this recovery budget, it's not really about increasing taxes for Wanjiku, but at the same time, focus on people who should be paying taxes,
Yes.
but they're not.
Yeah. Actually, we have been, there's an estimate based on research that we are losing about 800 billion shillings a year on unpaid taxes. This is where we should focus. The tax management, we should invest in tax management. I think one mistake that I think we are also doing as a country is not to invest in tax management. KRA, we are putting pressure on KRA, fine, for the officials in KRA. You remember there was a time working in KRA was like a gold mine. People were rushing, leaving even better jobs in private sector to go to KRA because there was black money that was coming into people's pockets in KRA. That has since reduced, but it has not been eliminated completely. We need to look at KRA and reform it completely. But again, we also need to invest in KRA. We need to put money. In fact, there is this research that has been done that for every shilling you give to KRA, you gain 100 shillings. So for every investment that we make, a shilling of investment would bring us 100 shillings. If we give ARA 1 more billion shillings to reform it and to make sure that they are more efficient and effective in collection of taxes, we will get 100 billion shillings. So that is also something that we need to focus on. Although this budget is giving them slightly more resources, but it is still not adequate. I think we are failing to finance those important agencies that would help get us more resources, agencies like the Office of the Auditor General, KRA, and even some institutions like EACC, which are supposed to fight corruption and help us save a lot of resources for our development.
And even as we finish, I'll just request the studio to give me just a few more minutes if you can comment on debt, because debt is, of course, a key concern, and it is highlighted, of course, in the
debt
budget.
is of a key concern, and I want to say that our build-up of debt started way back in 2013 aggressively, and I think that is where we got it wrong. So between 2013 and 2019, we were borrowing expensive debts. We were going Eurobond, we were going commercial debts, which were charging our nation, our country, and our taxpayers 8%, and the resources that we got were misused, either stolen or put in stalled projects or put in projects that are going on forever. Now, that has put us in a situation where the amount borrowed cannot be paid back with ease. Right now, this financial year, we are expected to retire or pay back 1.2 trillion shillings. It is not a mean achievement because that is the same amount we have provided for current expenditure and only making available 610, 50% of that amount for development. That clearly demonstrates that we are a country that is borrowing to consume. And we need to be careful. Right now, fortunately, we are borrowing or getting cheaper loans, like the 120 billion out of the 271 billion we are projecting to receive from foreign in terms of foreign borrowing. For 2021-2022, we are expecting to borrow 271 billion from external borrowing. Out of that, about 120 billion will come from IMF and World Bank, which is at a very cheaper rate, largely at 0% interest rate, and with a very flexible repayment period. But previously, we have had cases where we borrow expensively. But finally, my concern is our projection or our intention to borrow domestically 658 billion. That is so high, and it is likely to crowd out the private sector, as we have always said. And so the government is planning to compete with the private sector in terms of borrowing from financial institution or commercial institution. That is likely to compromise investment and therefore job creation, which is one of the three issues that we need to deal with. That is economic growth, employment creation, and poverty reduction. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much for your input. Of course, always a pleasure talking to you, John Buddy, Minority Leader in the National Assembly. Brenda, this, of course, are just some of the insights that will be coming out of Parliament, even as we wait for the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury, Kuriatani, to give the budget reading. But right now, my colleague, Abby Agina, will join us in studio to give us more details and the highlights of the budget.
All right, thank you so much, Brenda Kerubo, for that insightful interview. And we're still here with Brenda Radido as well as the Daktari, and we'll be getting back to them shortly. But taking off from those numbers, Brenda, clearly there seems to be a mismatch. And we'll be looking at some of the highlights that we have prepared for you in terms of how the Kenya Revenue Authority has been performing in the last 7 years since President Uhuru Kenyatta took over office. We'll also be taking a look at inside the budget. What do these numbers mean? Let's take a quick look at those numbers now on our super wall. We start with how the taxman has performed since 2013. Revenue collection was at 964 billion shillings. Thereafter, 2015, it improved slightly to 1.07 trillion shillings. But the best year for KRA was 2016-2017 and also 2017-2018 financial year, where they were able to collect a whopping 1.44 trillion shillings. Well, it doesn't stop there. Let's proceed further and just take a quick look at 2018 as well as 2019. How did the numbers look like for the taxman? Well, 2018 revenue collection was at 1.58 trillion shillings. 2019-2020, 1.6 trillion shillings. And of course, since COVID kicked, we've seen a big drop in revenue collection, but the taxman was able to defy odds and collect about 1.19 trillion shillings. Well, looking at it from where we sit, the taxman has, of course, been riddled with a number of challenges, from tax leakages to also tax avoidance here in the country. And this will be some of the key issues that will be coming up in the speech by CS Kuriatani. Well, the taxes are a pivotal plank when you look at the national budget, because this is how the government plans to finance the 3.6 trillion shilling budget. We're looking at a budget deficit of about 1.56 trillion shillings. And like we did see in the last fiscal year, KRA was able to collect just under 1.15 trillion shillings. Will they be able to hit the 1.56 trillion shillings? I'm sure Brenda will be putting this question out to the guests that we have with us here in studio. But let's quickly move ahead and look at the numbers inside this particular budget. And of course, how are we going to be taxed in this fiscal year? Well, our budget size is at 3.63 trillion shillings. That is the largest in East Africa. Tanzania as well as Uganda will also be presenting their budgets later on this afternoon, being members of the East African community. Our national government will be taking away 1.93 trillion shillings out of this 3.6 trillion shillings. It goes to show you the breakdown. Let's look at how the executive, the parliament and the judiciary will be actually dividing this cake. The executive, that is under the presidency, they'd be taking in 1.88 trillion shillings. Parliament will be taking up about 37.8 billion shillings. And the judiciary, which is literally right now one of the key areas that we are seeing a lot of reforms in, it's going to be taking about close to 18 billion shillings in regards to allocations. Well, quickly, let's look at the consolidated fund. This will be gobbling about 1.33 trillion shillings. County governments, where we've had a back and forth, county governors saying pesa mashinani, they'll be taking home 410 billion shillings. This is a big improvement compared to what we saw last year, which was at about 370 billion shillings. So we are slowly hitting the 15% mark of the budget. Well, let's take a quick look at some of the top 5 ministries that will be getting a lion's share in regards to the budget. The National Treasury will be taking away 167.8 billion shillings. Ministry of Health, 121.1 billion shillings. And the Ministry of Defense, just about 119.8 billion shillings. And last but not least, we have water and sanitation. And this is, of course, a key pillar when you look at food security in the country. they'll be getting 78.3 billion shillings. The Ministry of Energy will be taking away 75.4 billion shillings. These are some of the numbers that we have just broken up for you, including also the Big Four, which will be looking to cement President Uhuru Kenyatta's economic legacy. They'll be taking about 135.3 billion shillings. Well, I'd like to engage with Brenda briefly, just to pick her mind as well. Brenda, definitely interesting numbers. Many Kenyans wondering, how will we finance this budget? And perhaps from where you sit, what worries you the most when you look at these numbers, the trillions of shillings?
What worries me the most, Abby, is first of all the most talked about 16% VAT on basic commodities. Like the price of basic commodities will definitely go up. And you know, even as our colleague Brenda Kerubo was talking to the minority leader at the National Assembly, John Badi, about whether Treasury can be able to get this money, the deficit, raise the 2.9 trillion shillings by the end of July next year. And we're so optimistic. But I'm looking at the environment that we're in right now, and in terms of how Treasury has broken it down on how the